Hi, Misha here, and thought this might be fun to do a video looking at an alternative operating system, mostly used in handguns, that's just as old as the Browning design you all are familiar with a tilting barrel. You also might know the falling wedge design, like in the P38, the M9. But ever since the beginning, there's been another design. Rotating barrel. This is in a way like a delayed blowback, not dissimilar in principle to something on an MP5, but totally different action. And while this never really became the most popular system in the world, it has hung on, and they're still making guns today. For this video, we're going to start off more or less at the beginning with the Savage Model 1907. Then we'll get into the Austrian guns. We've got the Roth-Steyr, or some people prefer to call it the Roth-Krinka. Also Model 1907. And then a very similar gun, the Shire Model 1911 or Model 1912, depending on commercial or military. And often referred to informally as the Steyr-Hahn. All these three saw service during and after World War I, as well as some commercial sales. And then the Browning design kind of took over for the most part for many years, but the rotating barrel would pop up again with this pistol. This is the French MAB PA-15, later just P-15, from the 1960s and 1970s. Quite an interesting gun. While it never saw full-fledged military adoption in France, it did see police use. It was used in Finland, and it was used by some French special forces. And then again, of course, with the 80s, things like the Glock made the Browning system popular. But again, the rotating system really never disappeared. And thus we come to our final pistol, the Beretta PX-4. As you can tell, it's a modern polymer framed gun. Never really used by military, but has seen police adoption and continues the tradition started way back at the beginning of the 20th century. So, with that said, let's break down the history, and then we'll come back to the table and look at the individual actions and kind of go from there. PX4. 10 shots quick, as it was known, or as it was often stylized, like a pointing hand. The Savage Model 1907 is actually a very ergonomic little pistol. And it might seem odd to use any kind of locked breech system for a 32 or even a 380 by today's standards. But when this was designed, self-loading pistols were a very new concept, and they really weren't sure what they could get away with, and also the metallurgy of the day was nothing like it is today. This was actually designed by E.H. Searle, patented in 1905, and the Savage Company would buy the patent off of Searle, develop it into this pistol. It would first be sold commercially, but it would also be scaled up for .45 and tried out against Browning's design in 1910, eventually losing out quite famously to the Colt 1911 as it would be known. But that would not be the end of the pistol, not by a long stretch. It was a very popular gun commercially for its good ergonomics, high capacity. And this one here, as I said, was French military in 1914. Having a revolver as their standard issue gun, they knew they needed automatics. Now, most people know that the French used quite a few of the Spanish Ruby, which was a clone, a copy, a simplification of a Browning design. But they also officially adopted the Savage here, basically naming it the Model Savage pistol, or Melee 1914. And Savage would make a specific version that they called the 1907/1913, or just 13, number 3. It had the lanyard loop on the base. It featured a loaded chamber indicator, and just generally a military fit and finish. And throughout World War I, somewhere between 24 and 27,000 will be delivered to France, Portugal, but also purchased 1,150, using them in their navy. So it was a military pistol. The concept of the rotating barrel really starts here. Now, to be fair, John Browning had his own patent for a rotating barrel, but it was a different design and he never really went much with it. And to be really fair, Browning patented lots of things. The concept was the torque of the bullet coming out of the muzzle would both agitate the barrel to stay closed and also help it to unlock once the bullet left. That was the theory. In practice, it essentially operated as a blowback gun. But one nice thing, even though the barrel pretty much rotated well after the bullet was out the muzzle, because of the rotating barrel, it is a very smooth system. It has a lighter spring than a straight blowback, and also it has a very slim profile to the frame, because you don't have a spring above or below necessarily. You have it around the barrel, and it just kind of gives a nice compact surface, nice, and the aesthetics end up being quite nice, very rounded. And I think that's why it was a very popular pistol. Several versions would be made through the 19-teens. Of course, during World War I, a lot of civilian sales would be suspended, but they would pick them back up in the 1920s. And these would be famous really to this very day. It's also worth pointing out that there are no screws. The grips are pretty much friction fit. Another pistol that doesn't use screws is the Tokarev. And just really neat guns. So let's go back to the table and take a look at how the action functions. Alright, so the action on the Savage. It's interesting. Rotating barrel here. Pull it back. Hopefully you can see it maybe. This looks like a hammer. It's really not. It's the striker tail. But what's nice is you can lower it like a hammer. Sorry, I don't really care for dry firing. Like I said, we got our mag catch in the front. Remember, early days of autoloaders, guys. Very easily drops out though. I think the idea was you're meant to use your bottom finger to hit it or something, but you can also come up from the bottom. Here's our double stack magazine. Pretty simplistic design at the top by today's standards, but hey, not only was 10 rounds a large capacity, It's also a very small mag and quite lightweight, and they were pretty reliable considering how early this concept was. Safety, pretty standard. And no, I'm not going to disassemble this on camera because while I can get these apart, they're not the easiest and they can sometimes bite you. So yeah, that is the Savage. Let's move on to the next one. The Model 1907 Roth-Steyr or Roth-Krinka was designed by Carol Krinka, who started working on a self-loading pistol way back around 1900, about the same time that Jorge Luger's design was gaining traction. And he first had a working prototype in 1904, meaning it technically predates the Savage. 1906, it was put into military trials, and one being adopted as the Model 1907. And this was specifically adopted for the Austrian cavalry. And it became officially the first self-loading, the first automatic pistol to be adopted by land forces of a major army. So kind of specific there, because obviously Switzerland was the first to really adopt a semi-auto with the Luger, but this was the first really major combatant. It is very tellingly designed specifically for cavalry use. It's a large gun, about 1 kilogram, over 2 pounds. It's about 9 inches long, just over, a barrel just over 5 inches. It fires the unique 8 by 19 cartridge. Holds 10 rounds. It is stripper clip fed. It does not have a detaching magazine. The magazine is internal. The reason they did this, early magazines could be problematic and expensive to produce and easily lost or broken. So the idea was simply to have one well-made mag inside the gun. It can actually be removed for cleaning or maintenance or replacement. But you know, they could put the time and effort into making it and do it right, fit it to the pistol, and then make inexpensive stripper clips to feed the guns. Different thoughts. This is technically a double action only, although it does have a partially cocked striker, not dissimilar in concept to what would later be used on a Glock. And of course it's in this video, so it is a rotating barrel. This was done so it could fire a more powerful cartridge than it would have done just a straight blowback. And it was just the system at the time, because back then they hadn't really settled on something. It worked well enough. The pistol was relatively complex and complicated to manufacture because of all the fine machining, but it was surprisingly durable and quite reliable. Manufacturing would begin at the Steyr factory because the Roth factory just could not meet the demand, and then it would be picked up at what we know as FEG in 1910. Since this was really for the Austrian cavalry, they would make 99,000. The majority, slightly, by Steyr, FEG making a slightly smaller number. Main production would actually be over right as World War I began. However, older pistols were refurbished and put back into service throughout that war, and some pistols were assembled from existing parts during the war. After it really was formed, the Austrian Air Force also used this handgun because it had what they needed, as did the cavalry. Relatively long range, a long smooth trigger for safety. You know, when you're riding on horseback, galloping, you're getting jostled around, so a hair trigger is not what you want, much like when you're flying in an airplane. The cartridge, 8mm, was adequate for the time. By today's standards, we would consider it anemic. But the pistol had a good capacity. I mean, 10 shots was nearly double that of a revolver. Say that 10 times fast. And they were easy to maintain in the field, if again not to manufacture. They did require quite precise fittings, which is why they were not kept in major production and or used for mass issuance throughout the entire army. That said, they were used by a few other nations. For example, Italy, Poland, Czechoslovakia did issue the Roth-Steyr. They were continually refurbished throughout the 1920s, at least until 1926, in Austria and Hungary. And some were in service all the way up until World War II. Well, let's take a closer look at this action and how it does work with stripper clips. So, as far as the Roth-Krinka's action, you can tell by my hand it's a very large pistol. I would remove the magazine for you, but like I said, it's a fixed mag, stripper clip fed. Here's your guide. When it's not cocked, you have just a clicky trigger. Kind of reminds me of a semi-auto Uzi, you know, when you go to pull it and you get that click because it's just not engaged. And you pull it back here. Here's our rotating barrel. It's in this, I'm going to point this at you. You can see it recesses into the sleeve. This is one of those guns you really don't have to worry about accidental discharges for the simple fact that where are you going to find this ammo? Guess reload your own. Here's the action, kind of pulled out the back. Very Nambu, I mean the system is totally different than a Nambu, but the way it comes out the back and exposes some of the guts reminds me of a Nambu. Very durable, very chunky firing pin. This is a shockingly durable gun. You can look in there. Now you would think this control would give you a little more warning, but it's pretty hair trigger, at least on mine. So if you own one of these, make sure your fingers are out of the way. And the way this operates, you'll see this sticks out the back. That's your striker showing you it's cocked. So it had an early cocked indicator. Definitely easier to pull back too. So you put your stripper clip in, feed it down, and you're ready to go. This has a really interesting trigger. It's pretty long and heavy, but also extremely smooth. And it has an interesting breaking point. You can pull it back. It's a stage trigger. You can definitely tell it was made for cavalry use, horseback and whatnot. Mechanically and manufacturing wise, a very interesting gun. And actually pretty darn simplistic to take apart, more so than you'd think for a pre-World War I self-loader. Well, with that said, let's move on to its sister design. The Steyr-Hahn, as collectors often refer to it today, is a very interesting pistol. It really played a significant part in World War I and even World War II, although it's not as much in the collector's mindset as maybe some others from the wars. This was developed by Steyr. It's kind of a improved version of Karl Krinko's design, whereas this was made specifically for cavalry and was an earlier pattern. The Hahn here was constructed, lessons learned, and meant more for general army, general military issuance. To that end, it fired a more powerful 9x23 cartridge. It was still stripper clip fed, holding 8 rounds instead of 10. We're a little shorter at about 8.5 inches, but we still have a 5-inch barrel, so they've just compacted the system a bit. We're also a bit lighter and simpler, and instead of having the unique striker system, this is a conventional single action only hammer with manual safety. They have greatly simplified the manufacturing process, which is why this looks more square, but it's actually quite comfortable. They've also simplified disassembly, and they've simplified the rotating barrel system a bit. And this is really when the locked breech potential, or at least delayed blowback potential of the rotating barrel was realized, because 9mm Steyr 9x23 is a very respectable cartridge, and this was a very strong pistol, even by today's standards. Very well done, more affordable, even more durable, and actually proved very good in the trenches of World War I, but it almost didn't make it there. Steyr offered this to the Austrian military, specifically the army, in 1911 and 1912, and the army wasn't interested. The Roth-Steyr was still in production for the cavalry, and they were more or less happy with the older revolvers that they already had, like the Gasser. So, yeah, the military was just not really needing a genuine automatic pistol for general issuance at the time. So without that, Steyr kind of took this and sold it on the commercial market. And this is where the name Model 1911 comes from. That was its commercial name. Early users included Chile and Romania, who actually purchased these in quite large numbers. At least for pre-war. And then finally, with the Roth-Steyr's production run ending in World War I beginning in 1914, the Austro-Hungarian military adopted this. And it was known as the Model 1912 for military use. Now, it's worth pointing out that some officers did private purchase and carry these, so they had a bit of a reputation, a good one. And they continued it throughout World War I, so much so that actually Germany purchased around 16,000 in a couple of contract batches during that war, as did Bulgaria. In total, Steyr made a little over 300,000 of these, with the main production ending around 1919. FEG does not seem to have made these from scratch, but they assembled many using Steyr parts, and also were a subcontractor making parts for Steyr, so they were definitely involved in the process. The rotating barrel here, like I said, is powerful. It locks up well. And one thing is, the barrel doesn't ever move out of alignment, it just rotates. And so with the traditional tilting or tipping barrel system, your barrel goes out of axis and has to return to give good groupings. This, it never really leaves its axis. Also, unlike a straight blowback gun, like for example an Astra Model 400 or 600, this doesn't need a particularly strong spring in the slide, or a large slide. You notice it's still relative, even though it's a very chunky gun, it actually, the bore axis and all that is quite slim. And they still stuck with the non-detaching magazine for much the same reason as on the Roth. really interesting. They were quite popular guns. You still hear a lot about them today. While main production ended with World War I, these were refurbished and redated all the way through the 20s and 30s. And actually on the eve of World War II in 1938, they took around 60,000, took out the 9x23 barrel, and put in a 9x19 Parabellum Luger barrel, designating it as the Pistol 12-0. And these would be issued in Austria to second-line troops, police, and also would be issued to German police and whatnot during the war. So this would continue in quite large numbers as a secondary gun throughout World War II. So, as we're done with the others, let's take a closer look at the action and some of the control features of this very nifty gun. So yeah, moving on to the Steyr-Hahn. You can definitely tell it was a more streamlined design compared to the Roth-Krinke, the Steyr-Roth, the Roth-Steyr, what have you. It was easier to manufacture, more durable, fired a more powerful cartridge, and it was our first to be truly hammer fired. Single action only. This back here is our rear sight, just a simple notch. It also doubles as our kind of charging handle. Actually very easy to charge these. Back here you'll see our stripper clip guide for the magazine and all that. Again, I can't show you how to detach the mag because it doesn't. Got our safety here. This also can be used as a manual holdback for the slide if we need to. There's our release. Hammer's cocked back. And put our safety on. Sorry, mine's a little, there we go. It's interesting, yeah, you almost have to pull back on the hammer a little bit to let the safety go up. But it is a very positive safety. And much like the Roth, this is very nice trigger. It's a little heavy, but very smooth. These are very well machined guns. This one probably looks a little blocky on camera, but it's actually extremely comfortable in your hand. Very US 1911-esque. They've also simplified the disassembly. Got the catch up here. These are a good bit easier to take apart and put back together than the previous version. And these are much more widely issued. And like I said, they even put 9x19 barrels in them and used them in World War II. So, a more successful design, even on the export market. And probably one of my favorites out of all these. But with that said, let's move past World War I and World War II and get into the more modern era. Just to make it clear, I'm not saying these are the only pistols to use the rotating barrel system. Just, you know, the most common ones, and kind of a nice trek through the 20th century. And with that said, after World War II, the system kind of goes dormant for a bit. And France would adopt this pistol here, the Model 1950, a very traditional design, very conventional. 9-shot, single action only. Saw quite a bit of use in Indochina, Vietnam, where it proved to be very solid, reliable, extremely durable, but not especially accurate. And so, in the 60s, the French company MAB was working on a new design, which would become the PA-15. There was also an 8-shot single-stack version known as the PA-8, the 15 being
double stack. It took the high power type double column single feed magazine, paired it with a pretty conventional single action only trigger, and once again went to the rotating barrel system. Now on our previous guns, we had a pretty light spring. This one has a pretty stout spring. But that's because MAB was kind of going for something different, trying to take advantage of the system's other advantages. It wanted the pistol to be able to digest pretty much any 9mm loading from light to heavy. But also, it wanted to correct the accuracy shortcomings of the 1950, delivering a more accurate pistol. And the rotating barrel system can do quite good on accuracy, because whereas on a tilting or tipping bolt, you have to kind of make an ovular cut at the front of your slide for the barrel, for the muzzle to work in. With the rotating barrel system, you can have a much tighter slide to barrel fit, and this on top of the fact that, again, the barrel doesn't actually have to tilt or tip out of alignment to work. MAB combined this with very good manufacturing, very high standards. Pretty much all the parts on this pistol are machined, including even the magazine floor plate. There's only a couple of stamped parts in the entire gun. But of course, this would also end up being its downfall, because it was relatively expensive. But I'm getting ahead of myself a bit. They tested these out in the mid-60s, and they introduced it to the market in 1966. They did try to interest the French military, the French government, who would purchase some sample pistols to try it out. Even some French special forces, the gendarmes, and others would use the PA-15 to some extent. But in the end, it never replaced the old 1950. I think it just wasn't enough of an advantage. And while it did have double the capacity and better accuracy, it was also more expensive. And this is still a very heavy gun. So, MAB would mostly find success with the commercial and some police markets. And then when they would go out of business in 1982, manufacturing would basically end. However, some have been assembled from leftover parts and whatnot since then. For all intents and purposes, manufacturing ended in the early 80s, with around 100,000 made, which is a very respectable number for a non-military, non-major adopted gun. So yeah, let's go in and take a look at how this one operates, and also check out its magazine, which is a bit unique in and of itself.
The MAB PA-15. Still single action. Pretty standard safety here. You cannot engage it with the hammer. Sorry, my hands are... Yep. Click. Word to the wise on these: when you have the safety on, trigger's blocked, don't go heavy squeezing it. That is a failure point with these. If people try to hulk on a trigger when it's got the safety on, you can bend or even break some of the internals there. If you're reasonable with it, it's not really a concern, but worth pointing out. Now this one, I can detach the mag. It's not ambidextrous, it's just the Browning style catch you're used to on the left. And kind of much like the Savage many years before, it was a bit of a pioneer in the magazine department. It took the 13-round high-power magazine, extended it to 15 rounds, and made some geometry improvements. These are extremely similar to Smith & Wesson Model 59 mags, so much so that you can modify 59 mags to work in the French gun. Slide looks pretty standard, but it has a pretty stout spring. Here's our rotating barrel. We do have a slide release. Let me see if I can rotate it so you can see it a little bit. Trigger is relatively short pull, crisp, but intentionally a little bit heavy for duty use. They did the F1 version will have a nicer, lighter trigger because it's for competition. Very standard sights. Nice deep serrations, I really like that on these. Typical synthetic grips. They have an interesting flare too. Much slimmer at the top than the bottom, which I like. It lets your hand really ride up on the pistol. Luckily, we've got a pretty good beaver tail here to make sure hammer bite is minimized. And for disassembly, these come apart virtually the same as a high power. Got your pin here. Just push it out. And your slide is pretty well self-contained, including the rather strong spring. The reason they went with the rotating barrel, after so many years of different designs, they wanted these to be able to digest a huge range of ammunition loadings. While the pistol itself is heavy, while the spring inside is stout, it also, on the other hand, has quite tame felt recoil. Very pleasant to shoot. And with that, let's move on to our final gun.
Right around a century after Searle and Krinka were making their rotating barrel system guns, Beretta introduced the PX-4 Storm in 2004. Now, this was not Beretta's first rotating barrel pistol. It did do the Cougar and a few others. This was meant to be a self-protection, police, duty size gun. Not exactly targeted at military users. It does borrow from the company's 92 series, specifically uses a similar safety style, but it's its own gun. In addition to taking advantage of the potential accuracy from a rotating barrel, which admittedly is negligible, it's more of a theoretical improvement than an actual one. And the fact that rotating barrels kind of let a pistol digest a wider range of ammo. A benefit that Beretta pointed out in its literature is that with a tilting or tipping barrel gun, you have that muzzle flip. But with the rotating barrel like this, the recoil is kind of spread out side to side and straight back with little to no actual flip. Again, theoretically giving less felt recoil. They also point out that it has quite a low bore axis, the way the spring system is arranged and everything. In other ways, it's a very conventional modern pistol with a polymer frame, reversible mag catch, easy disassembly, front and rear serrations, It's offered in full-size, compact, subcompact, specialized variants, 9mm, 40 caliber, 45, etc. You know, pretty standard gun. Not exactly one that's been setting the world on fire, but for the money, I've always found these to be interesting guns and quite enjoyable to shoot. They have seen, several police departments have adopted them, and a few government agencies, for example, the Canadian Border Patrol. But in general, it's just another polymer-framed gun in an entire generation of polymer-framed guns. But it does show that the rotating barrel system is not dead and still has application in the 21st century. So with that, let's dive in and take a closer look at this one.
And our final gun, PX4. Quite similar to the MAB in its operation, but a much smoother, lighter spring. It does have both hold back. I was just holding that on the release. Typical Beretta decocker safety. Completely disengages the trigger. You can charge it with it on. And when you release, the hammer will be down, which I like. Safety is a little more positive and a little larger than you'd find on an M9. So less likely you're gonna engage it, but it's still always a concern with that style. Pretty typical sights. These are dovetailed and adjustable. These are night sights on this particular model. Standard one slot pick rail under the barrel. Reversible Browning style mag release. Pretty standard modern looking mags. They are not interchangeable with 92, but they are very similar. Just dimensionally just a wee bit different. But yeah, your basic mags. They actually insert very easily. Got a lanyard loop on the bottom on this one at least. I like the texturing on the grip. It's not too aggressive, but it's just enough. The double action is, of course, long but smooth, and it's a little bit staged as well. The single action is perfectly respectable. Good clean break, nothing extraordinary, but this is again a duty pistol. Disassembly, we've got kind of a Glock style 2-finger release here. And like a Glock, you just pull it down and it slides off. You don't see much on the PX4 today, and really you never really saw a lot on it, but it's really quite a good gun. It has no major vices, as they say, and the rotating barrel gives it a very interesting shooting feel. It doesn't have the muzzle flip. It's more of a straight back with a little bit of a torque to it. I personally like how it shoots, but maybe I'm just crazy. Well, no, there's probably no maybe about it, but either way. All right, let's have a few final thoughts.
PX4.
Well, we really appreciate you tuning in with us. I hope this was interesting. I've always thought the rotating barrel system was interesting. These little Savages have been everywhere over the years, but I held off picking one up. Sorry, these are really stiff. I held off picking one up until a decent military one came around. You can get them in 380 as well, but I like little 32s. They're actually very ergonomic, looking at the curvy grip and everything. And I love the front mag release. It's just so weird and different. And I remember seeing the Austrian guns at various gun shops and gun shows when I was younger, and they always intrigued me just for how different they were. They always seemed very well made, which you'd expect from Steyr and FEG. But unfortunately, they fire their own ammunition, which you can't get. So these are pretty much in the correct collector's realm today, especially the Roth. The PA-15s were imported and sold commercially, and you find them. As I said earlier, some were polished blued, then they kind of went to this more matte bluing, and then later they were full Parkerized. Good guns, they really are, but they are heavy and large. They're a full-size gun. I've owned a few over the years, and every time I'd sell one, I end up picking another one up, and I've had this one for a long time now. I enjoy having them, and I have a French collection, so why not? I even bring them out and shooting once in a while. As far as the Beretta PX4, I bought a couple of these on a sale. I think it was at Classic Firearms. It might have been SOG or something. But anyway, on sale some years ago, they came with 2 or 3 mags, night sights, and they cost $379, and it was either free delivery or like $10 delivery. And I had always picked these up in stores, and like most of you, I thought that's a good gun, but it didn't really stand out. But the rotating barrel is kind of why I picked this up, because you just don't see many modern guns using the system. So, yeah, we've had it out shooting a few times now, and I really, for a modern polymer gun, it's very enjoyable. And the size fits me well. The grip's not too big. It's not an overly big, but also not an overly small gun. And I do dig the recoil impulse. But yeah, there are more than a few ways to skin a cat, and this one obviously does work. It has a few advantages and disadvantages, but it's hung on, and will probably continue to hang on, if not in pistols themselves, maybe in PDWs like the TP9, the MP9. That's a really good use of this system for how light and compact it allows the gun to be. If you own any of these, or if you have any questions we didn't answer in this video, please comment below. And as always, if you could like, share, and subscribe, that greatly helps both Jay and I. And if you'd like to help support the channel, please click on the link and check out our Patreon page. With that said, this is Misha, and we will catch you very soon next time.